sometime over the last year, Andy Ferguson and I were chatting, and he gave his usual ringing defense. To him, the Beatles are up there with Shakespeare and Dante and Michelangelo as one of the great efflorescences of all that is great about Western culture. And I took a couple of hours and I just listened. You can do this these days, of course. You type in Beatles and stuff comes up. And I suppose it may have been the first time in my life when I really listened to the Beatles music, and it wasn't just background. And I thought the tunefulness, the memorability, I thought these guys, I don't know whether they're up there with Beethoven. I'd probably argue against that, but these guys were really musicians. Okay.
Wait,
and then in the last, yes, I know.
Robinson? Just so we know, you've just discovered the Beatles?
Yes,
really?
yes. I'm telling you.
Oh my God.
I'm bearing my soul. However,
oh boy, there go our demographics.
In the last 10 days, I have gotten so sick of simply having a wonderful Christmas time that I think Paul McCartney and that song tank the whole project.
You understand that the Beatles did not record that song, right? I just feel I need to tell you.
Well, it's Paul McCartney. He's part of the thing.
Uh-huh. Oh, I didn't have this on my bingo card.
No. I have to jump in here. That was done decades after they broke up.
No, you don't have to jump in here. Well, this is the conversation.
No, we're perfectly able of pointing that out, Yeti, ourselves. No, right. I mean, Paul McCartney's post-Beatle work is all over the road. You could say that simply that Wonderful Christmas Time is just the most banal and irritating thing you've ever heard.
Yes.
And yet it occurs because it's
Party's up.
And I'm sorry.
I beg you, stop.
Every decade produces a bad, banal Christmas song that is nevertheless stuck in our collective gums like a popcorn hole forever. The 50s did it, the 60s did it, and that was Macker's contribution. I'll give him a lot of slack for his post-Beatle work because there's some really interesting songs in there.
Yeah, I agree.
But when it comes back to the Beatles themselves, it's a great tune book. It's a great song book. It's a great contribution to Western popular culture. There's really nothing else even though a lot of guys were getting out the guitars and banging around, they were different from that first galvanic chord of The Hard Day's Night to the underharmonies that defined the sounds that they made. They were special. The more experimental they got, the more they drifted off. I think the more diluted the impact was on music and culture, but there was still beautiful stuff there. There was a wonderful combination of sensibilities plus Ringo that produced great popular music. Now, Beethoven, doesn't even compare because it doesn't have the ingenuity, doesn't have the complexity, doesn't have the sophistication. But, you can put them up there with Gershwin. Gershwin is one of those guys from whom flowed this endless series of effortless melodies, and he was a great player.
Cole Porter, Gershwin, yes, right.
Right, and so,
but there was a Great American Songbook sort of stuff, right?
Right.
All right.
So, yes. The Beatles were extraordinarily influential and important, and they great contribution, but there's not at the same level of a.
Can I just make two?
I can see Rob's face. He's thinking,
moments
I can't believe I'm listening to this in 2020.
I cannot believe that in the middle of this, we're talking about the Beatles. But okay, I'm a huge Beatles fan. I'm a giant Beatles. I co-sign everything James just said. I just would only say that what's most remarkable about them is that they started in the early 60s and they were wrapped up and done by 1970. So maybe about 8 years, 7-8 years of actual output. Astonishing.
Yes.
Astonishing level of, even cultural change. They start in a black and white movie on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they end in bizarre Dayglow Technicolor with beards and hippie wigs on the roof of the Abbey Road Studios, singing an impromptu outdoor concert. That's pretty incredible, a huge amount of cultural and creative life packed into a tiny amount of years, considering we've been listening to Lady Gaga for 8 years. But I just want to say we glossed over. First of all, we're not even gonna talk about why suddenly Andy Ferguson introduced Peter Robinson to the Beatles in some weird, superannuated old folks' home kind of transfer. The idea is crazy to me, but I know we say it every year, and I say it every year, and it's that time of year where it's the Christmas season. where we have to say there is nothing worse than Frosty the Snowman. That is the worst, lowest, darkest period in American culture, the worst aspect of American culture I can ever think. I can't imagine anything I hate more than Frosty the Snowman.
Well,
Burl Ives, even with that sort of jolly.
No, that
makes it worse.
No. I mean, Rob's correct in a sense. I mean, there is some what sort of devilish necromancy is in that hat that brings Frosty to life. I don't know.
While we're on old man stuff, one last Christmas song.
Well, technically, we're always on old man stuff. But go ahead.
I have now got to this stage where I'm looking back on my father, who's been dead for 20 years, more than 20 years. I didn't grow up in a very well-to-do family, and there was one record player, and we only had a little, maybe there were a dozen of 45s. This is when way back, earliest memories. Mm-hmm. And then eventually there was a stereo that got bought, but still very limited record collection. And the one Christmas song we had was Bing Crosby and White Christmas.
Oh.
And I spent a lot of my life looking back on that thinking, there's just what lowbrow tastes. But now I realize when I was a little kid, the Second World War was still, that my parents were close. They lived through the war. They were closer to the Second World War when I was a little kid than we are to the Reagan administration now. And White Christmas came out during the war. It was about Americans who missed each other. And so I now see, I can sort of understand a little Christmas thing in my upbringing. And the second half, let us put it this way, the second half of middle age, there are certain graces in that it permits understanding of things that baffled one for a long time. That's my little Christmas
I'll be home.
I was just going to mention that. Yeah.
I had a sad song. Yeah.
I had the first.
What year is that? Is that a World War II song as well?
World War II,
yes,
right?
Got it. And I remember sitting in a bar in Washington, D.C., and I wasn't going to be in Minneapolis or Fargo that year, and hearing "I'll Be Home for Christmas," and it finally hit me at the end of it, if only in my dreams, because you weren't going to be home for Christmas.
Right.
So yes, I mean the entirety of the 20th century pop music canon, you'll find an emotion in there. There's endless reasons for it and pleasures to be found in exploring it.